people are going to decide how long the shutdown is.
Right, and we're going to be talking about that later in the program with some top pharmaceutical executives. But in the meantime, we've seen this extraordinary response from the Fed and the federal government right now. You heard Larry Kudlow say it could add up to about $9 trillion. What more should you, as a Fed governor, what more are you recommending the Fed do right now? And will we need another congressional package?
Well, the Fed is standing behind the financial system. Clearly, we are going to put whatever we need to do to make sure the financial system continues to run. But this is first and foremost a healthcare crisis. And so anything Congress can do to support more investment in any of those technology breakthroughs will be money well spent. And number two, if this goes on for a long period of time, I think it's going to go on in some phases for a year or two. I think Congress is going to need to continue to give assistance to workers who've lost their jobs. I mean, as you said, it's really around 24% of people right now who are out of work today. And if this is a gradual recovery, the way I think it's going to be, those folks are going to need more help.
And Lizanne, what advice are you giving to all of your customers right now about how to think about this market and this economy?
Again, we're reminding them that the speed with which the bear market unfolded, the rally that has happened since then, the compression in the economy is unlike we've ever seen. But you really can apply the same kind of logical thinking and disciplines around investing that can apply even in this short-term environment, which is hopefully you had a plan, you weren't winging it. Diversification across asset classes, make sure you have some sort of anchors to windward associated with less risky investments, and then use the ability and benefits of rebalancing. So trimming into strength and adding into weakness, sort of just staying on the right side of the, for lack of a better word, the trade. And it's really those tried and true disciplines that are the closest thing to a free lunch. Too many investors think the only path to success requires top picking and bottom ticking, all in, all out. And that's just gambling on a moment in time. And investing should always be a process over time, even when what's happening is in a more condensed frame of time. And that's the best advice we can give in this environment.
And finally, Neil Kashkari, you have access to the best economic information in the world. What should everyone be expecting over the next several months as we wait for effective treatments, as we wait for vaccines? Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin this morning is saying that unemployment could go as high as 25%.
Yeah, and the worst is yet to come on the job front, unfortunately. And then it really is going to be, as these states start to reopen and as businesses start to reopen, obviously, we need them to reopen safely, and we need to monitor and look for signs of things flaring back up again. We may be in an environment of gradual relaxing and then having to clamp back down again around the country as the virus continues to spread. To solve the economy, we must solve the virus. Let's never lose sight of that fact.
Neil Kashkari, Lizanne Saunders, thanks very much. A week that set some of the worst records ever for the American economy. It all became clear on Friday. We learned that morning that 20.5 million Americans lost their jobs in April, 10 times the record set in 1945 when the country demobilized from World War II. The unemployment rate jumped to 14.7%, the highest since the Great Depression. We've never seen it rise so high so fast. Just 3 months ago, unemployment was at a record low of 3.5%. And as stunning as those numbers are, they don't capture the depth of the damage. Add in workers who've been looking for full-time jobs, the furloughed would hope to get their old jobs back, and more than 1 in 4 Americans is out of work. The lines at food banks are heartbreaking. We can all hope that the economy will bounce back once the virus is contained. Investors seem to be betting on it. By the close of business Friday, the stock market was building on some of its best weeks in decades. So what is Wall Street seeing that Americans aren't yet feeling? How long will the recovery take? What must we do to make sure it happens? And we start with the President's economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. Larry, thank you for joining us this morning. And I do want to get to the economy, but first, this news breaking overnight. We know that 2 White House staffers have now tested positive for COVID, and Drs. Fauci, Redfield, and Hahn are all self-quarantined. Will you and other White House staffers be following their example?
Well, we'll take the advice of the White House medical unit, which is the best in the business. There may be, I don't want to rule anything in or rule anything out. At the moment, there's daily testing, as you may know, for people who come into contact with the president and the vice president. Everybody wants to be safe. We're going to do the best we can. We'll follow the rules and guidelines of the White House Medical Unit.
You just said you had the best medical unit in the country, the White House Medical Unit. No doubt that is true. You're getting tests every single day at the White House. Anyone who's in contact with the president, doesn't that really expose the challenge for everyone else in the country right now? If the White House is not fully safe, despite those conditions, how can average Americans feel safe with the idea of going back to work?
Well, look, I don't want to generalize from it because although I don't have all the numbers, I haven't seen that yet. In terms of the White House complex, which is an enormous place, at least 500 people, probably much more than that, George. Those who have tested positive is still a small fraction. Again, I don't know the specific numbers, but we've had relatively very few. And look, I think the key point here, we've established guidelines from our health task force. States are establishing guidelines. I think that businesses, large and small, are probably going to wind up leading this charge as we attempt to reopen the economy and deal with these heartbreaking jobs numbers, these hardship jobs numbers, which are awful. So my point is, why don't we rely heavily on what the businesses, the free enterprise system can produce? Companies are very innovative. They know the job that has to be done. They know on the one hand, folks have to be safe, must be safe. They know on the other hand, we have to have some reopening as much as possible to deal with the economic problem, the pandemic contraction, as I call it. So I think between public and private health systems, we can do this. I guess about half the states are off to a phased-in start. That's a good sign. Safety is absolutely crucial, but it's not either or. I think it's safety and reopening for the economy. I think they go hand in hand.
Let's talk about those devastating job numbers. The president said on Friday that all these jobs will be back. Is that a realistic promise? Is that a promise the president can keep?
Well, look, several things. Number one, as bad as those job numbers were, and I don't want to sugarcoat it because I think the numbers for May are going to be also very difficult numbers. It's going to take a while for the reopening to have an impact. So there's that. The second point is, inside the numbers, there's a glimmer of hope. I don't want to downplay the numbers, mind you, but there's a glimmer of hope. We had about 80% of it was furloughs and temporary layoffs. That, by the way, doesn't assure that you'll go back to a job, but it suggests strongly that the cord between the worker and the business is still intact. I think hopefully that has something to do with the $3 trillion of assistance, including the payroll protection plan. All in on this, we're probably, including the Federal Reserve's operations and the budget and fiscal work that President Trump has led with the bipartisan congressional votes, we probably had, George, $9 trillion worth of assistance going to 175 million individuals. It's a remarkable plan to attempt to stabilize a very difficult situation.
It has been an extraordinary response from the government and the Fed. Now House Democrats are saying, led by Speaker Pelosi, that they need about another $2 trillion plan, aid to state and local governments, much more testing, more direct aid like unemployment insurance, food stamps, direct checks. Yet you and the president have said now is not the time to be dealing with that. Why not?
Well, I'm not saying now is not the time, and I don't think that's what the president said either. I think that many people would like to just pause for a moment and take a look at the economic impact of this massive assistance program, which is the greatest in United States history. That's all that's being said. Now, I was reading in some papers this morning that there's no talks between, let's say, the White House and the Democrats. That's simply not true. There's no formal negotiations yet. I say yet. But in fact, on Friday, Kevin Hassett, my colleague in the White House, and I did a conference call with about 50 House members Democrats and Republicans, George, and we are scheduled to have a similar conference call tomorrow on the Senate side. Democrats and Republicans were collecting ideas for next steps, which will undoubtedly be data-driven. I do think there are issues here, and there are probably going to be some agreements and disagreements. Each side has its own positions. So it's not that we're not talking. We are. It's just informal at this stage. And really, after all this assistance, let's have a look at what the impact is in at least the next couple of weeks for the economy.
We've now heard from President Obama, former President Obama, for the first time on his take on how the White House